in her short life. It looked like Amy Robsart had it all, beautiful and young. She was also married to one of the most powerful men in the land, Queen Elizabeth I's favorite, Robert Dudley. But one infamous September day turned Amy into the Tudor period's greatest true crime story. Amy Robsart was part of a deadly love triangle between her husband and Queen Elizabeth I. When she died under suspicious circumstances, rumors swirled, but modern historians have revealed the twisted truth. Stick around for more on that later. Amy Robsart grew up in comfortable surroundings in 16th-century Norfolk, England, with a gentleman farmer for a father. She knew her letters, was trained in the Protestant faith, and received an education better than most of her contemporaries. But it wasn't these accomplishments that shot her into the upper echelons of society. It was a man. When she was 17 years old, Amy Robsart met Robert Dudley, a handsome, vigorous man the same age as her with connections to royalty. At the time, marriage was seen as a vehicle for a political alliance, not for romantic feelings, but Robsart and Dudley were the exception. The good-looking young pair quickly fell in love and were soon engaged. It was like something out of a storybook, but even from the beginning, their fairy tale was dark around the edges. Robsart's gentleman father had amassed many lands of money in his time, but she saw nothing of discomfort or wealth in her dowry. Her marriage contract stated that she would only inherit after both her parents passed. As a result, Robsart would be entirely financially dependent on the gifts and kindness of other people, especially her new father-in-law, John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick. This worrying dynamic only deepened. Dudley's family merely tolerated the match and didn't view Amy as any kind of prize. Thanks to the Dudleys' connections, Amy and Robert's June 1550 wedding was something of an event, and Amy completed the picture as a beautiful wife. It took place at the Royal Palace of Sheen, and the 13-year-old King Edward VI even attended to show his support, but the day was also marked by scandal. Love matches weren't just uncommon at the time, they were also looked down on as unseemly, and one of the wedding guests, Baron William Cecil, would later snare that it was a carnal marriage. For the first 3 years of Robsart's married life, all went as happily as the fairy tale she was promised. Amy was known to enjoy finery and kept up sumptuous lodgings with a full complement of servants. The newlyweds also attended Edward VI's court regularly, and when they weren't there, they took up residence at one of the Dudleys' estates. Then, in 1553, trouble began brewing. In May of 1553, Amy got a new sister-in-law, Lady Jane Grey, who married Robert's younger brother, Guilford Dudley. As a cousin to King Edward and a great-granddaughter of King Henry VII, Jane was very much a prize for the Dudley family, unlike Amy. In fact, the Dudley clan had one enormous ulterior motive for bringing Amy's new sister in. By the spring of 1553, one brutal truth became clear. The young King Edward VI, never a healthy boy, would not survive much longer, and more worryingly, had no solid ears. Amy's canny father-in-law, John Dudley, who after all ran Edward's government, had brokered the marriage to Lady Jane because he knew she might very well be the next monarch. Then he made sure this would happen, and by any means necessary. With Edward on his deathbed, John Dudley pushed the king to name a successor he preferred. Namely, the Protestant Dudley wanted Edward to bypass his Catholic sister, Mary Tudor, and as a result also bypass his other Protestant sister Elizabeth, and give the crown to Jane's line. The fact that Jane was now in the Dudley family, totally coincidental. By that July, when Edward finally perished, Amy's father-in-law had succeeded. Nothing was ever the same again. On July 10, 1553, Amy Robsart woke up as the sister-in-law to the new Queen of England, and the Dudley clan had clinched their continued power in the realm. Given her previous history with the family, Amy might have assumed it would soon be back to her fairy tale. But if so, she was very, very wrong. Poor Lady Jane Grey was nothing but a pawn for Amy's father-in-law, But that didn't stop the vicious backlash. Knowing she had been cheated of her rightful claim to the throne, Edward's elder sister Mary Tudor immediately raised an army, and within 9 days Lady Jane was deposed and imprisoned. Just like that, the dream was gone. In the wake of the Lady Jane scandal, Amy Robsart was at the center of the punishment. Her husband, Robert Dudley, had led a force to stop Mary's army, and he was arrested and thrown into the Tower for his part, along with most of the men in his family. The Crown sentenced him to death. Amy was facing grim prospects, but this is when she showed her mettle. While Robert was in the Tower, his fate hanging in the balance, Amy made sure to visit her husband regularly. Records show the Tower lieutenant permitted her entrance into Robert's cell and there to tarry with her husband. Yet while Amy was showing herself as a devoted wife, Robert may have been doing another kind of tarrying entirely. While in the Tower, Amy's husband just so happened to meet a beloved childhood friend, Princess Elizabeth, the half-sister to the new Queen Mary, who was there thanks to the more collateral damage from the Lady Jane Grey debacle. It was the beginning of a relationship that would plague Amy all the way up to her suspicious death. But right now, she had bigger things to worry about. Amy Robsart sat through weeks without her husband. Then the real nightmare began. In August 1553, a month after the coup, Amy's ambitious father-in-law, John Dudley, went to the scaffold. Queen Mary had now proven she was more than willing to execute her enemies, and the younger Dudley generation was next. As 1553 turned to 1554, Amy Robsart continued to put on a brave face and support Robert, but when Queen Mary sent Amy's brother-in-law Guilford to his death shortly before Lady Jane herself, she must have worried that her own husband was next. It would be 6 long months before she had her answer. In October of 1554, Amy finally got heart-stopping news. After much finagling from the Dudley family to befriend Queen Mary's new husband, King Philip II of Spain, they managed to free Robert and his surviving siblings. Amy's husband was at long last beside her. Dudley's return was by no means a happy ending. For one, Amy Robsart and her husband were now only welcome in Queen Mary's court if King Philip was present. Even though Philip liked them well enough, the Queen was still incensed at the family. There were other problems, too. Most of Dudley's ancestral lands had been seized by the Crown while he was in the Tower, and they were short on money. The couple lived almost hand-to-mouth for years, depending more than ever on the generosity of family. It was a humiliating prospect for a bride and a groom who once thought they had everything. Then Amy's personal woes deepened. Around the time that Robert was finally released, Amy got the news that her father had passed. A few short years later, the tidings worsened. In 1557, just as Amy and Robert were getting back on their feet, her mother also died, leaving her with a scarce amount of people she could depend on. Now that Amy's parents had passed, she could finally inherit the estate that had been dangled in front of her ever since her marriage to Dudley. It was too bad then that Amy and Robert's marriage was beginning to crumble. Amy had now been married to Robert going on 7 years, and one thing was becoming increasingly clear. She had not married Prince Charming. In fact, the same man who had once described Dudley as a handsome, vigorous man had also added that he had very little sense. Somewhat capricious and unthinking, Dudley was carrying around a heavy open secret. When Dudley returned from the Tower, he was deeply in debt. As the months went on, this only got worse, and Amy often had to bear the brunt of the shame. At one point, Dudley was off fighting for the crown in France, another sign of his return to favor, and Amy had to settle his debts in his absence. By 1558, Robert Dudley was firmly a favorite with Princess Elizabeth, and her influence was obvious. That year, Queen Mary officially reinstated Robert and the rest of the Dudley children in blood at Parliament, marking their surefire comeback. Like her half-brother, Edward VI, Queen Mary had always been sickly, and in the fall of 1558, she was near her end. In response, her husband, King Philip, called Amy's husband to court as one of Elizabeth's special friends. Still, it's possible Amy Robsart had only a few suspicions then. That would surely change. After Mary passed in 1558, Elizabeth succeeded her on the throne as Queen Elizabeth I. She made sure to thank her new favorite Robert profusely, giving him the title Master of the Horse. The post suited Amy's athletic husband, but it also came with big strings attached. Now that Dudley had an official royal post, and his childhood friend was Queen of England, he felt, and he was, obligated to spend weeks and months away from Amy. If he had any qualms, the Queen very much let him know that his place was at court in London, beside her and not his wife. As it happened, Amy needed her husband now more than ever. While Robert was often away at court, Amy was far away, usually staying with friends since her ancestral house was uninhabitable. That's when she began getting worrying symptoms. Amy reportedly began suffering from a malady in one of her breasts, likely breast cancer. But Queen Elizabeth's reaction to this news was jaw-dropping. By now it was clear to everyone in court that Elizabeth was wholly in love with her favorite Robert Dudley. So when she received the news that Amy was ill, word got out that Elizabeth began to hope for Robsart's death so that she could marry Dudley. At the time, Queen Elizabeth was deep in negotiations for her own marriage, but she kept frustrating suitor after suitor, seemingly holding out for Dudley and enraging her courtiers in the process. While Amy was ailing in sundry places around the English countryside, her husband was engaging in suspect activities. According to the court rumor mill, he not only did whatever he likes with affairs, thanks to his influence, but word even got out that Her Majesty visits him in his chamber day and night. People also began to notice not just the Queen's treatment of Dudley, but Dudley's treatment of his wife. While Queen Elizabeth was lavishing Amy's husband, courtiers very much noticed and pitied how much the monarch iced Amy out, seemingly never inviting her along to court and keeping her in the countryside. It was a far cry from the halcyon days when Amy and Robert would attend Edward VI's court together. But when Amy got sick, Robert Dudley really showed his true colors. The illness Amy had was surely serious, yet her husband's response was cold. He didn't seem to make her a priority in the slightest, and the time she did get with him now was meager. He visited her for just 4 days during Easter in 1559. Whatever love match Amy had with Robert, the bloom seemed off the rose. Instead, Amy had to take matters into her own hands. The longest stretch of time the sickly Amy did see her husband, for around this period, was in May of 1559. Unsurprisingly, she dragged herself to him, staying in London for about a month in order to see him. When she did arrive, her appearance must have surprised half the Tudor court. Word had gotten around about Amy's dire illness, but at the end of her trip to London, she seemed to be making some improvements. The Spanish ambassador noticed she had little appetite, but was showing better health than he'd thought. Yet the same ambassador had a dark theory about all this. Upon seeing Amy, as well as the state of Queen Elizabeth's marriage negotiations, the ambassador suggested a diabolical plot. He believed Robert and the Queen were poisoning Amy, and that Elizabeth was stalling her negotiations. Reportedly, around this time, Robert Dudley had exclaimed to a confidant that if he lived another year, he would be in a very different position from now. Some assumed that this meant he would divorce Amy, especially now that the Grim Reaper wasn't about to lend a hand and marry the Queen in her place. No divorce materialized, however, because tragedy and infamy struck first. By the end of summer 1559, Amy had taken leave of Robert Dudley in London, and by that December she had yet again relied on the kindness of friends to lodge in Cumnor Hall. While there, she had luxurious upper apartments with her own private staircase, and access to a terrace garden and a Dare Park. Yet her husband would never see these things. After leaving him in London, Amy never saw him again. All the way through 1560, Robert Dudley stayed firmly away from his wife despite her recent health scare. After all, he was too busy attending to Queen Elizabeth III in Windsor Castle. That September, Dudley received a message now blackened with suspicion. On September 9th, the messenger informed Dudley that Amy Robsart was dead, having fallen downstairs at Cumnor Hall, where she was staying just hours before. She was only 28 years old, and she and Dudley had no children. Amy's entire household was in utter confusion about the tragedy, and a shocked Dudley sent his steward, Thomas Blount, to try to understand more. From the very first, everyone had two gruesome questions in mind. Was this a tragic accident, or had something more sinister happened? The answers he got were no comfort. The coroner's report shed light on the tragedy. Amy had sustained two head injuries, one of the depth of 1/4 of a thumb, the other of the depth of 2 thumbs. It also noted she had broken her neck. Still, Dudley's man, Blount, pressed further and got much more than he likely bargained for. When the servants in the residence of Cumnor Hall described Amy's demeanor that fateful day, they revealed just how horrific these past months had been. Amy, as any wife in her position might be, was anxious and nasty. That morning she had insisted on going to the fair in town, and then flew into a rage when her retinue suggested this wasn't proper. But it got more alarming the more they spoke. Amy's erratic behavior that day was apparently not a one-off. Blount wrote back to Dudley to say of Amy Robsart, "I have heard divers tales of her that maketh me judge her to be a strange woman of mind." When he spoke to Amy's maid, this strangeness turned sinister. The maid indicated that she thought with all Amy's emotional turmoil that she had an evil toy in mind, and may have thrown herself down the stairs in despair. Whatever the truth, the inquest produced one infamous answer. After a trial to determine foul play, the court ruled Amy Robsart's death as a true accident, stating that, being alone in a certain chamber, she accidentally fell precipitously down, from the best they could tell from the evidence. For many, this provided some closure to a tragic story, but there was still one shockwave to come. In the next few days, Dudley planned his wife's funeral, went into mourning for 6 months, and stayed well away from court for a long while. Although he did not attend the funeral, which was common for the time, he did empty his pockets to the tune of £1 million in today's currency to give her the send-off. Perhaps he felt guilty for neglecting poor Amy, but some say he was guilty for a much darker reason entirely. In the wake of her passing, many in Queen Elizabeth's court believed Robert Dudley had something to do with it, especially as it would clear the path for him to marry Elizabeth. In fact, however, it had quite the opposite effect. As news got around of the details of Amy's fatal fall, the scandal grew to intense proportions. Even those who didn't believe Dudley was guilty of her death, but didn't want him as Elizabeth's consort, got in on the rumors, pushing Dudley to become persona non grata in the Tudor court. Whether he deserved it is another story. As penny dreadful as it might be to think Robert Dudley offed his wife to become King of England, modern historians almost entirely dismiss the idea that he had anything to do with it. For one, he was far too bewildered by the news, and for another, he had very little to gain by attracting that kind of scandal. He wasn't a good husband, no, but he wasn't a murderer. Even so, he paid the price. In October, Dudley came out of hiding and returned to Elizabeth's court, apparently in great hope to marry the Queen. By then, Elizabeth understood she could never marry him, blackened as his name was, and Dudley's prospects shuttered. Thus, Amy Robsart's end may have changed the future of the English monarchy. The truth of her final moments, however, is still in the wind. While most experts agree on Dudley's innocence, we still will never know exactly what happened to young, beautiful, discarded Amy Robsart that day. The majority believe it was just an accident, but there is still perhaps the saddest option of all, that, desperate, ailing and alone, She really did take her own life. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.